Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 138, recording on Tuesday, December 30th. Happy to be back on a Vikings 4-game win streak. They cannot lose. No, that is not possible at this point. They won on Christmas with Snoop Dogg and Bocelli and the entire ensemble of what was a pretty entertaining halftime show. We're not going to talk a lot about that. We will be very direct and all-encompassing with the football today, and I'm looking forward to that. Have a bunch of questions from you guys, which I asked for on social media. Got a bunch of them at Alec_Lewis, where you can follow me on Twitter, and going to hit all the subjects. Brian Flores, J.J. McCarthy, quarterback of the future, coaching staff kind of nuggets, anything and everything that I have. We'll unload the clip throughout the course of this podcast, and looking forward to doing that. If you're new here and watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. We would really appreciate it. It helps us out. It brings the show to more people. And as you all know, I've had a blast doing this now for more than a year, a couple episodes a week, while I also balance the day job of covering this team for The Athletic. So please, on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. And then if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast, you can rate and review, and all of that stuff helps us out as well. This show, the Alec Lewis Show, is presented by First Resource Bank. And if you don't know about First Resource Bank, you haven't been paying enough attention. It's one of the fastest growing banks in the Minneapolis area. It's a member FDIC bank run by really good people: Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. They care about this team. They have questions all the time about what the Vikings situation is and will be, and I try to give them as direct answers in private as I do here on the show, on the Alec Lewis Show. So please, First Resource Bank, you can get information about how to set up an account in the description below. All right, let's not waste any time. We're going to get right directly into questions, and the first one comes from a listener whose name is Dave. Dave asks a question about Harrison Smith, and it is: if Hitman retires, do we bring him in as a DB coach with the look for a future DC, smart Hall of Famer? Look, the way I'd answer this question is, if you could convince Harrison Smith that coaching would be the correct profession for him after spending 14 seasons in the trenches playing this game, you do it any day of the week. But the odds of convincing that guy who has given his entire body and really mind and time to this game, the odds that he's going to continue to do that and put in some of the hours that these coaches put in, I'd say are extremely low. Could he be somewhat of a consultant on the side? You'd love for that to happen, but if I'm not, if I'm expecting things and looking at it clear-eyed the way I feel like I typically do, I wouldn't be surprised if Harrison Smith returns to Knoxville, Tennessee, alongside his family and young children, with his plot of land that he bulldozes and does whatever he does with it, and kind of is away from all areas of the spotlight down there. And I'm sure he'll feel the call, to come back home at some point, home being here. But that's kind of how I see the next iteration of Harrison's life going, whenever that next iteration comes. And I will say this. I mean, I thought he was incredible on Thursday against Christmas. And I wrote a long story after the game about just his emotion and the emotion from the crowd in celebrating him and him celebrating the crowd, and just how special of kind of a moment that was in time for a guy who has had a host of special moments in his career. But he was flying around. Physically, he looked as good as he has all season, and it's probably easy to forget or overlook at this point the fact that he did start slow this season, missed the first couple of games because of a personal health issue that definitely prevented him from maintaining his regimen and his training and his body work from the offseason into the regular season. So, not only was the personal health issue something that he had to recover from, but it was also something that was almost compounding in the fact that it didn't allow him from the outset, even when he did return to some minimal snaps in week 3 against the Bengals. Like, it was something that affected his viability and his playmaking ability, even then. What I would also say about Harrison Smith's performance, I mean, the interception, that's just like a classic quarters look where the safety really has no business being in that space that Harrison Smith ended up being in to intercept that pass from Jared Goff intended to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And part of the reason Harrison Smith was able to make that play was because of just film study and understanding that Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown love hitting those kind of intermediate end breakers. So just a phenomenal play. And then, like, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that a lot of what the Vikings are doing now and have done over the back half of this season defensively, which has obviously been a stretch that rises among the best since Brian Flores arrived here, so much of the strategy has been blitzing and being aggressive at the line of scrimmage and showing the all-out pressure and dropping some guys and sending other guys. And so much of that strategy has been collaboration between Brian Flores and Harrison Smith. Now, there are other cooks in the kitchen, whether it's defensive pass game coordinator Durante Jones, whether it's linebackers coach Mike Saravo, whether it's Eric Wilson and Blake Cashman on the field. But there has been a lot of communication internally between Brian Flores and Harrison Smith. And then those two communicate almost on a series by series basis on the sideline. If you're attending this game this Sunday, I would just put your eyes on the Vikings sideline between defensive series, and there is a high likelihood that you'll see Brian Flores over there scrolling on his iPad, or the Microsoft Surface, They don't sponsor, so we're going to be A-okay with that. But I'd take a service if they want to, even though I'm kind of an Apple guy, which probably doesn't help the Microsoft Surface ad. But anyway, you'd see Brian Flores scrolling on the iPad, and then you'd see Harrison Smith approach him or Brian Flores approach Harrison Smith. And that communication and synergy is one that I'm sure in the history of the game, it won't be talked about. There are these special coach-player relationships that kind of live on forever. I mean, just when you think about the current dynamic, you think about Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, and you think about, Chris Jones and Steve Spagnuolo, and probably there are plenty beyond the Chiefs that I could come up with if I took the time to do it. But Harrison Smith and Brian Flores collaboration probably won't be remembered, but it really should, especially here locally, because their brain power in tandem has produced just a special operation, a special period in Harrison Smith's career. And the praise that Brian Flores is receiving, some of that is obviously influenced by having Harrison Smith and being able to call the defense with multiple calls that Harrison Smith is on the field toggling in and out of, kind of like a quarterback at the line of scrimmage. So, to see Harrison Smith's emotions after the game was pretty astounding for me. Like, he is one of the few players that I've covered where when he talks, you feel the weight of whatever he's talking about, whether it's his own career, whether it's where the team is. Like, after the, I believe it was the Seattle game, he and I spoke in the locker room, kind of over near his locker, and his, I would say, frustration, exhaustion, disappointment of the season was just very clear with how he spoke. So he just has a special way about him. And then, the other thing about Harrison Smith, as I talk about the future with him in accordance with this question from Dave, like, I don't expect him to be the announcer type unless it's Pat McAfee invites him up to be a guest on his show to kind of shoot the breeze around once in a blue moon. And he would be phenomenal on that with AJ Hawk, with all of those guys. Like, that would be a spot where to hear Harrison tell stories in that environment, that's the fit for him post-career in terms of lingering around kind of the sport that he obviously has loved talking about Harrison. Like, that's kind of the vibe that would make the most sense to me, just knowing him and observing him, etc. But great question, Dave. The next comes from Mr. Minnesota at Lil Womp 247. Getting a lot of questions from Lil Womp 247 recently. The question is there any smoke with the running back position? Interest in Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, or Jeremiah Love? So the first thing I want to do to answer this question is just to give you some of the study / work I did on the front end of answering this question on Aaron Jones. So Aaron Jones is 46th out of 57 qualified running backs in yards after contact this season. 46th out of 57. He's 52nd out of 57 in missed tackles forced. He's 26th out of 48 in rushing success rate. And he obviously has only played 12 games and missed time with the hamstring injury. Aaron Jones has an interesting contract where if the Vikings wanted to this upcoming offseason, really shortly, the offseason is forthcoming quickly, they could part ways with him and recoup. They would absorb about $7 million in dead money, and they would recoup around $7 million in cap space for 2026. There's a lot of dynamics with that conversation. I mean, one, you can't overstate Aaron Jones's role in the locker room. He's been a key voice for head coach Kevin O'Connell. He has great relationships with a bunch of the key Vikings players and leaders, including Justin Jefferson. And then he has, when he's been healthy, he's been a 3-down back, meaning, yes, he runs the football. Yes, he's a pass catcher and works in the screen game, which the Vikings have done a ton of this year. Leaned way heavier into the screen game this year than in years past. And then he is a reliable enough pass protector. Now, you don't love seeing him taking those hits from blitzing defensive backs and linebackers because that contributes to some of the injury risk. And then if you were to part ways with Aaron Jones, that would lead you down the road of what happens at running back next to Jordan Mason. And now Jordan Mason's numbers are really good. I didn't write those down for you guys, but believe he's like 5th in rushing success rate out of the 48. His yards after contact is close to a yard more than Aaron Jones. He doesn't probably have the breakaway speed, but from he'll get 5 if there's 5 to get. Like Jordan Mason, that is his skill set, but he is not a great pass protector, and he is not an incredibly reliable catcher of the football. And so regardless, it probably makes sense for the Vikings, especially if they're going to move on. I mean, definitely makes sense if they're going to move on from Aaron Jones, but you could argue the fact that the Vikings should move on from Aaron Jones and potentially find a younger player at the position. Now, Mr. Minnesota, who asked the question, brought up some really interesting names. Kenneth Walker, he's kind of like your incredibly explosive, twitchy back, but doesn't always get what's there for him. And then as a pass protector, you're rolling the dice. Breece Hall has had up and down seasons, has been really dynamic at times, more of the all-around style back. And then Jeremiah Love is the Notre Dame product who's going to be a first-rounder. By all accounts, is one of the premier players in this draft. It just becomes a question of, is he going to be there when the Vikings are picking? And if he is there, is it sensible for this Vikings team, with where their roster is, to take a running back? I've said this plenty of times on the show and in writing. The Vikings haven't drafted a defensive full-time starter since before Kwesi Adofo-Mensah arrived here in 2022. And so, this defense, while Dallas Turner has started to come on, and I've been as critical as anybody probably about evaluating his play, but the explosiveness and the athleticism is definitely there. And if he continues to push and improve and, put on weight and be reliable enough in the run game, like his trajectory is obviously angled up. And then I've really liked what I've seen from Jay Ward in his spot snaps in recent weeks. But given the lack of sheer game-breaking, ball-hawking, physical, young talent on the Vikings defense, it would behoove them to be in the market via the draft for that type of player. And so, like when you're talking about Jeremiah Love, that's kind of the conversation that you have to have. Now, I'm always, and I have always been, the best player available guy. If Jeremiah Love, your confidence level that he's going to hit a premium style player is at, let's say, 70%, like that's the route you should probably go. I've said this many times too. The Vikings loved Jahmyr Gibbs and they loved Bijan Robinson. And that's really easy to say in hindsight, but I'm telling you convincingly on the front end of what I believe that was the 2023 draft, the Vikings were very big fans of both of those guys, and had they existed at the Vikings pick, it would have been interesting to see what they would have done in that spot. I mean, some of the other running back names that I just wanted to pass along as potential possibilities into next season if the Vikings do move on from Aaron Jones. I mean, some interesting ones. Javonte Williams of the Cowboys, he carries with him a little bit of injury risk as well, but has had a good year and is a 3-down back, can pass protect. He showed that in the game against the Vikings. Travis Etienne is an interesting player who would have schematic crossover given his time spent with Liam Cohen and Grant Udinski. Kenneth Gainwell has had a pretty good year and is a pass-catching back. And again, he's been in Pittsburgh. He was with Philadelphia for a long time. So those are a couple of the names. I mean, the Packers, Emmanuel Wilson has really come on for the Packers behind Josh Jacobs. He'll be a free agent. And then, you could talk yourself into the Brian Robinson Juniors of the world and others kind of throughout free agency. But it is a pretty, if you look at the free agent positions of this upcoming offseason, running back is one where there is a lot of depth and a lot of intriguing players there. So if that's where the Vikings wanted to save money and spend money, it would be a sensible spot. And I am not, while I love analytics and I love data and I try to keep up with the trends of how teams are allocating money on rosters, I do feel like the running back position is very important, and a good running back, it's kind of like in my industry, like with an editor, you realize you realize you have one when you have one, and you realize what one looks like when you don't. And so, yeah, that's what I'd say to the question about running back. The next question comes from Purple Persuasion at TPP Skull. Do you see any of the coaches below Wes Phillips, the offensive coordinator, or Brian Flores, the defensive coordinator, getting promotions with other organizations? 4 names came to mind for me when I received this question. The first would be Durante Jones. Durante, I already mentioned on this podcast, is the defensive passing game coordinator, has been the DB's coach here for years, was a DC at LSU for a season years ago, and Brian Flores has really embraced him since he arrived. So, Durante was a coach at the Senior Bowl a couple of years ago. He interviewed last year with the New Orleans Saints, and from what I understand and understood just in the aftermath of that, they really liked his interview. They really believed he was coordinator caliber and would be in the future. So Durante is definitely a name. If another, staff or coach, offensive-minded coach, let's say, receives a head coaching position, and they want this style of defense, that would be an interesting name. So he'd be the first one of 4. The second would be Mike Saravo. Mike Saravo is the Vikings linebackers coach, has done really, really good work this year, obviously with Eric Wilson and Blake Cashman. But he's got an interesting background, was in college for a while at Baylor, comes with some of the college-y principles and ideas and schemes which can, be adaptable within the NFL. He worked with Phil Snow in Carolina, and then Brian Flores has brought him here. And he's got kind of a, no nonsense disposition to him that probably is beneficial when you're standing in front of a bunch of alphas and teaching and coaching. So Mike Saravo would be the second. Keenan McCardell, the wide receivers coach. I mean, the trust level that it hasn't. I should preface this because people will scream at me. It hasn't been the greatest year from the receivers in terms of the drops. And I mean, Jordan Addison's season has been really topsy-turvy, and Justin Jefferson, he's navigated a lot to manage this entire season as a whole. So probably not the best tape to be submitting in terms of while you're seeking coordinator interviews, but the respect from Keenan, both in the building, from players, from coaches, or outside the building, is pretty clear. And he too has received interviews in past years, so I don't know why he wouldn't this season, even with the struggles that the Vikings have had. I mean, the system is still the system, and Keenan McCardell's experience and kind of the level of conviction you have in him when he is in charge of specifically that receiver room is enough to get him there. And then the fourth name, probably more of an interesting one. Younger dude, he's coached outside linebackers this year, has done a lot of the developmental work with Dallas Turner this year specifically. His name's Thad Bogertis, and he was with the Rams for a while, has been with Kevin O'Connell now multiple seasons. He was the assistant linebackers coach with Mike Sarava last year and has coached outside linebackers this year. But he's kind of, for me, a little bit in the Chris Shula mold. Shula is the defensive coordinator of the Rams. Saw an interview from Chris on before Monday Night Football, and sounded very McVay-ish with how he talked. In the event that a guy like Chris Shula got another job, I mean, that I'd wonder if a relationship with he and Thad might lead to some kind of movement there. But I will say, to the question, I monitoring the coaching staff and the look of the coaching staff beyond just what happens with Brian Flores is something that I will be looking at, because it's just going to be interesting to see what type of talent leaves the building, the types of decisions the Vikings make in many regards. So it's a good question there. Next one comes from the Fort Myers Vikings fan. Is there anyone in-house who could replace Brian Flores, someone that has the same style, so we, the fans, would not notice much of a difference without Flores next year? I wish it was as simple as saying that. I mean, the names that I just passed along to you would be the guys, probably Durante Jones and Mike Saravo above all. If the Vikings if Brian Flores were to leave and the Vikings were wanting to stay internal, those are the two names internally that I would look for. But to just think that you would replace Brian Flores with continuity and scheme, for me, isn't giving Brian Flores the requisite credit for what he's been able to do here. It's not just the scheme. It's not just the play calling on Sundays. It is the teaching throughout the spring and the summer. It is the adaptability throughout both the spring, the summer, the season, game day. When you realize something's not working, being able to tweak it on the fly, make it easier for the players, make it more complex for players, switch coverages, change fronts. Really late in this season, it's kind of gone under the radar because it's just not the sexiest of talkers. But part of the reason the Vikings have been better at stopping the run is because the Vikings have just said, you know what, we're going to play with 6 down fronts, essentially 4 defensive linemen and 2 edge rushers, and you're going to have to throw it over the top of us. And how many coordinators would be willing to place that structure out there and carry the risk of getting beat on the back end? And so, again, the Brian Flores and the job he's done here is not just his specific scheme and the play calling on Sunday. It's everything else. It's the personnel vision and marrying what he wants to do on Sundays with the types of players that they bring in terms of high aptitude players, high IQ, guys who are calm within the noise, guys who are communicative, on the field and off of it. And so there's just a lot to it. And then there's the disposition that he carries. Like, I joke all the time in training camp or even on practice days during the week. You watch Brian Flores walk out to practice, and you know that he means business. Like, that's just what it is. And you can't really fake that. I mean, like, certain guys have a little more edge to them or not. And so, like, that would be the thing with Mike Saravo or with Durante Jones. The question that the Vikings would have to ask if Brian Flores were to leave is, like, do these guys have, the characteristics to rise to that level? And are we, like, would we as an organization, this is the question they have to ask, would we as an organization be okay with the growth that, would probably be required for those guys to get to that place? I mean, you've seen it like with Detroit with their brain drain, specifically offensively. When you have that level of elite coordinator, like, you can try to replace it with experience, and they did with John Morton, but it comes with no guarantees. And that's why I've said on this podcast and in writing many, many times, if you add Brian Flores' departure to the list of questions this team already has to ask, it becomes even more difficult to see the viable path of this team finding its way, like, directly toward contention. So that's the way I'd answer that question from Fort Myers Vikings fan. By the way, this show is sponsored by Unreal. I'm wearing it on the hoodie right now. I believe this is the Elevation hoodie. It's exceptional. It keeps me warm when you got blizzards like we do. I mean, I had my family in town, was driving through it was just gnarly out there, I believe, on Sunday. My brother's flight got canceled. He was staying here. He needed Unreal to be able to stay warm. But they also have these limited edition hoodies. This is one of their last ones of the season. But, it's just really high level, thick, great quality, full zip. I don't know which friend of mine is going to get this one, but whoever is, I promise you they're going to be happy about it. But that's a locally owned brand, Unreal. And it's another one where, like I've said many times, when I did this podcast and never set out for sponsorship stuff, and when it became possible, it's like you want to align with brands and companies of people you like and trust and respect and think are forward thinking, and Unreal is definitely one of those. So just wanted to give them a quick shout out. The next question comes from Shane Hoffman, who asks what is on everybody's mind every single day, and probably is a question and an answer that we will be discussing on the Alec Lewis Show for months, whether we get tired of it or not. I don't really, Shane, you, the listeners, whether you're walking on the treadmill right now, whether you're walking outside, whether you're driving in the car, we're all going to be, our minds are probably going to be situated on this question. But Shane asked, do you have a name or three of free agent quarterbacks you think would be a good fit to come in and either back up or compete with JJ? So, again, this is the ultimate question. And here's how I start. I will start this answer. Until some of the offseason events, whether it's Combine, Senior Bowl, owners meetings, conversations, it's hard to have any educated, fact-based perspective to be able to answer this question where I am very convicted in the names that I give you, is what I would say. And typically, I don't like throwing stuff out there unless I have great confidence and comfort with what I say and report, or not confidence and comfort, till I'm 100% sure of what I'm saying and reporting. So that's how I'll start with that. So all of this is speculative, but it will allow me at least to kind of frame to you the conversation in the way that I think this needs to be thought about. So I posed this question to a buddy the other day, and I'll pose it to you guys now. What is the goal for the 2026 season? Like, what should the goal be? And the easy answer is you want to win the Super Bowl. But, like, what is the realistic goal for 2026? I asked that question to you, and you can mull it over. But the likely answer, if I'm guessing, is that you are going to prefer the Vikings to get back to the playoffs and win a playoff game for the first time in over a half decade. And that is a sensible path. And so if that is your answer, the answer to Shane's question in terms of what the Vikings need to do at quarterback, which is essentially what he's asking, needs to fit in accordance with your answer to that question. If your answer is the goal needs to be to make the playoffs and win a playoff game, what quarterback room gives the Vikings the best chance of making that happen for 2026? And if the immediate answer is J.J. McCarthy because of what he showed against the Giants and the Commanders and the Cowboys, then that's your perspective and that's sensible. And, if you're projecting forward and you're telling me that J.J. McCarthy performs like he did in those 3 games for the entirety of the 2026 season, yes, the Vikings and Brian Flores is still the coordinator and the Vikings have added some talent via the draft and free agency. Yes, the odds would be very high that the Vikings make the playoffs and can contend, and can win a playoff game. Now that's a lot of projection. So what type of player can the Vikings pair with JJ, who obviously, has missed games, and if he misses games next season, they're going to need a quarterback to be able to step in. Like that's how I think am considering this question. And so you asked for 3 names. I'm going to give you 4 free agents. You asked for free agent quarterbacks. So these guys are all going to be free agents. Daniel Jones, who obviously is navigating a really serious injury that is going to require a lengthy recovery, and will he be ready by week 1? And how important is that in the Vikings calculus? All fair questions, just one of the obvious names that comes to mind. The other ones, Jimmy Garoppolo he would be probably more in the backup to J.J. McCarthy type of situation and less of the competition type of pairing with J.J. McCarthy, but he has familiarity with Sean McVay's system. He has competed in the playoffs in the past, and he is going to be a free agent, and he's probably not going to cost a ton of money, which allows you to spend some money elsewhere. So that, again, that's more of your how much risk are you willing to take. J.J. McCarthy and Jimmy Garoppolo, that's a pretty sizable amount of risk. J.J. McCarthy and Daniel Jones, also a pretty sizable amount of risk. Aaron Rodgers is a free agent. Does Aaron Rodgers want to play another season? Would the Vikings be willing to just name him as the starter? Because that's what he would come here to do, obviously. He's a name who I have to put here because of the conversations that he and Kevin O'Connell had last offseason and because his production, if he produced like he has done this year for the Vikings in 2026 with the same type of defense and the same coordinator and the same weapons, the odds would be that the Vikings would be in the playoffs and probably compete in the first round for sure. So his name, and then the fourth would be kind of a newcomer probably to the list, in Malik Willis, who has looked really, really good stepping in for Jordan Love in Green Bay. The system familiarity matters. He hasn't thrown a ton over the middle of the field, so that would definitely be something that, the Vikings would have to sift through. And then what is his contract going to look like? Like maybe Miami or Las Vegas or another team, Indianapolis even, views Malik Willis as someone they want to make a sizable bet on. How far would the Vikings be willing to go? Now, you had asked for free agents, so that's kind of the realm that these 4 names are in. I mean, you could talk about whether it's, other options, trade. I mean, what happens with Kyler Murray? What happens with Kirk Cousins in Atlanta? Would you be willing to risk it on Zach Wilson, excuse me. Mac Jones was another name on my list. I mean, none of these options probably feel exceptional, and it's part of the challenge that the Vikings are about to embark on is how do you get this quarterback room from where it is to a place where you have comfort and conviction that this room rises to a level that could lead you to the playoffs and win a playoff game if that is your ultimate goal for 2026. And part of the reason why I say that's the ultimate goal is because you got a head coach and a GM who would be entering their 5th seasons without a playoff win. I mean, how long can you, I mean, it's like at some point, like that is the objective and that needs to happen. And so that's where my mind goes with this question. And again, none of these names for me specifically feel great rolling off the tongue. They just don't. Like, it would be easier in many ways if there was a more obvious candidate like a Sam Darnold was in 2024, but it's hard to see that player making sense. Like, you could talk yourself into Zach Wilson, but the inaccuracies of Zach Wilson have been drastic, and the Dolphins are providing their opportunity to Quinn Ewers right now, whether that's ownership mandated, whether that's coach driven, what have you. Like, you know, if the quarterback room for 2026 is J.J. McCarthy and Zach Wilson, and the Vikings were to go 7-10, the revisionist conversation would be they for the second year in a row, the Vikings entered a season without a quarterback room they could really believe in, and a win, you know, paired with the win now roster. And so preventing that from being the situation probably has to be the North Star of the discussions, the conversation, the introspection inside the TCO Performance Center over the next few weeks. Question-wise, I'll rattle off a few more. Matthew Collar asks, how deep in the playoffs will our Minnesota Wild go? I mean, I'm all in on the Minnesota Wild. I had Michael Russo on the show. That should tell you everything you need to know. But they are a wagon right now. How far will they go? I mean, I don't know. It would be a blast to see that team in this state really push deep into the playoffs. I know it's been forever, but why not? Why? I mean, why is the cup too much? Vying for the cup, is that too much to ask? Probably, but I'm doing it. Let's see here. Probably a couple more. Someone asked if I've seen Stranger Things. I haven't watched Stranger Things. I'm more of a Landman guy. This second season probably hasn't been the most active, and like the plot's interesting, but like an hour every week when I sit down and watch Billy Bob do his thing on camera, like I enjoy it. I don't need, like, I'm a stickler for structure and plot and story and great writing, but sometimes you just need like some classics on your screen of great lines and picturesque scenes in the middle of West Texas, etc. Let's see. I'll do one more. Someone asked, if you had to put your money on the line, is Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Matthew Stafford our starting quarterback next year? If one of those guys is starting quarterback next year, wow, is what I would say. But, you know, you never say never with anything. I talked about the Joe Burrow conversation on the last podcast. Like, I don't know why Cincinnati would trade Joe Burrow. The Ravens and Lamar Jackson's kind of an interesting situation, but a guy who's been that elite, you're really going to part ways with him. And then Matthew Stafford, does he want to keep playing if they win the Super Bowl? Would he want to move to Minnesota? Like, obviously he and Kevin O'Connell have a great relationship, so it's hard for me to rule anything out. But I mean, you're really wishing, hoping on that one, is what I would say. But I'm not ruling anything out. Yeah, that'll probably do it for this episode of the Alec Lewis Show. If you got any more questions, throw them in the comments section. I'll try to get to them, or toss them at me on social media at @Alec_Lewis. Appreciate you guys being here. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you can rate and review, and all of that good stuff helps us out. Show's presented by First Resource Bank. It's sponsored by Unreal. And then I've been hitting up Milburn Clothing recently. They've got incredible suits out in the St. Paul area. Really good people in there to, tailor you up, and made it really easy for me when I went in there to get a suit to try to look better than I probably should. So Milburn Clothing, I'd go check that out. Just wanted to throw them in here as part of the podcast. That'll do it for episode 138. Stories galore at The Athletic, so please go check those out. Excuse me. I'll be a co-host on the Friday Football Feast on Friday morning on KFAN. And with that, we will talk to you later this week.